Like you wouldn't even know.
The red light.
Thank you all for coming. It's a good turnout. It's a pleasure to see all of you. We're here to talk about a topic that's really important, which is global poverty. And I think most of us don't really have a proper appreciation for the scope of poverty in the world. We know kind of that it's something that we should be worried about. And some of us might even have an idea about how big the problem is, how many people are affected. About 10 million people die every year of easily preventable diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, or diarrhea. And it's impossible to understand what that means in human terms. We can try to think of other examples of great tragedies and other losses that we've seen and compare it. But it doesn't tell the whole story. We can compare it with the fact that about 300,000 people died in the earthquake in Haiti last year. By comparison, every 2 weeks, 300,000 people die of the kinds of diseases that I'm talking about. 60,000 Americans died in the war in Vietnam. 60,000 people die of these diseases every 3 days. I don't say these kinds of things to belittle these other kinds of tragedies, but to try to help us get an understanding of the scope of world poverty and how big these diseases really are. The size of this raises some important questions for us to think about. Do we have an obligation to do something about this problem? If we do, what would be the most sensible way to proceed? These are some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to thank some people for helping to make tonight's talk possible. The event is receiving financial support from the Graduate Student Association and the Department of Philosophy. I'd especially like to thank all of the instructors who helped promote this talk tonight. Without your help, we couldn't get this many people to hear, and this kind of talk wouldn't be possible. I'd like to thank also the members of the Rutgers chapter of Giving What We Can, who put everything together for us. So please join me in thanking Boris Yakubchik, Katie Kozlowski, Connie Lee, Derek Kiernan, Eric Hoverston, Jesse Koza, Lucy Jordan, Mark Lee, Michael Liccardi, Steve Myers, and Tim Campbell. Tonight we're going to hear talks from two very interesting people. Each will speak for about 30 minutes, and then there's going to be a chance for questions and answers. After that, I'll make a couple of brief announcements, and then we'll be done. Our first speaker tonight, Professor Larry Temkin, is from our philosophy department here at Rutgers. Larry's a world-renowned philosopher known for his groundbreaking work on the topic of equality and the nature of moral ideals and practical reasoning. He's been a visiting professor at Oxford, Harvard, the National Humanities Center, and Australian National University. And his work also has an influence on policy. He's spoken and advised at places like the World Health Organization and the World Bank. He's also a great teacher. You can tell this by looking at all of his teachings awards that he's gotten over the years, but I know it best from all the things that I've learned from him since I've been a student here. Our second speaker, Toby Ord, is the founder of Giving What We Can and a moral philosopher at Oxford University. Giving What We Can is an organization that's dedicated to fighting extreme poverty in the developing world. And we use unconventional methods. We're not a political organization. We don't send people abroad to volunteer. What we do is we pledge to give 10% of our income to the charities that are best helping people in the developing world, the ones that score the best in terms of cost effectiveness. The organization is growing fast. Though it's only a little over a year old, we already have over 100 people who have taken our pledge. That might not sound like a lot to you, but together we've pledged over $30 million for the world's most effective charities, and it's going to make a huge difference. Giving what we can is quickly becoming a natural meeting place for determined, intelligent people who are really serious about making the greatest difference that they can. With that said, please welcome our first speaker, Professor Larry Temkin.
Thanks all for coming on a Wednesday night. Of course, if it was Friday night, you'd all be blasted by now. So I'm glad it's Wednesday night. In the opening sentence of his powerful book, Living High and Letting Die, Peter Unger notes that each year millions of children die from easy-to-beat disease, malnutrition, and bad drinking water. Indeed, as he notes, in each of the past 30 years, well over 10 million children die from readily preventable causes. Our question is as simple as it is poignant. What, if anything, should our reaction be to the fact that we could easily prevent the deaths, each of us, of many innocent children? This is a topic that's all too easy to comfortably ignore, even as our actions or inactions literally and indisputably make the difference for whether innocent children live or die. It is a topic that cries out for careful, detailed, and rigorous arguments that can't possibly be presented in the time allotted here tonight. So this talk is doomed to be superficial and unsatisfying. Still, I can present some relevant considerations that may help provide a framework for thinking about this crucially important topic, even if they do not settle it. Part 2, possible responses. Putting the question as I did above, it may seem there's an obvious answer as to what we should do. But in fact, the question provokes a wide range of responses. At one end of the spectrum are those people like Garrett Hardin, who argue that we should do nothing to prevent the innocent deaths of distant children. Indeed, that it's actually bad to aid such children, claiming that for every child we save today, 5 will die tomorrow. Others claim that we may help unfortunate children if we like, but we may also permissibly ignore their plight. There are at least 3 different bases for this position. The first is a deep skepticism about morality itself. On this view, there is no right or wrong. Hence, nothing we do is wrong. And so, failing to help the needy cannot be wrong. The second is a kind of contractualist or social convention view of morality. On this view, right and wrong simply reflect the agreements of rational, self-interested agents. Thus, I act wrongly only if I violate my freely chosen moral agreements. And if I don't want to join an agreement requiring me to help the world's children, well, that's up to me. A third view is a libertarian view. On this view, people are free to act however they want, so long as they do not violate anyone else's rights against non-aggression. On this view, people have a right not to be attacked, and I act wrongly or unjustly if I violate that right. But they have no right against me to be aided, and hence I do not act wrongly or unjustly if I fail to aid the needy. At the other end of the spectrum, some think that we must do everything we possibly can to aid the needy. In principle, this may include giving away all of our wealth and belongings until we are no better off than those we seek to aid. On this view, we must be prepared to sacrifice all of our personal interests, including those of our family, for the sake of aiding as many as possible. Moreover, not only must we sacrifice our own interests, we should do whatever is necessary to prevent avoidable deaths, even if this requires sacrificing the interests of others. Indeed, even if it requires stealing from, harming, or possibly even killing some for the sake of saving more numerous others. Utilitarians have long been associated with such positions, but other powerful arguments supporting some of these views have been famously advanced by Peter Singer and more recently by Peter Unger. As is often the case in morality and life, the truth about this issue is complicated and difficult to discern, but it almost certainly lies between the extremes noted above. Surely we do not have to do everything possible to save as many as possible, but neither can we simply ignore the world's children. We must, I am confident, do much more than most of us do to alleviate hunger and illness. Part 3, a framework. So far, I have only offered assertions. Let me next offer a framework for thinking about this topic. I spent 15 years working on a book about equality. Because of this, people expect me to defend my views about the needy in egalitarian terms. But this is a mistake. There's a strong tendency for people to think about what ideal they value most, and then to address every moral issue in terms of that ideal. So, for example, utilitarians, libertarians, and egalitarians address issues in terms of what would be best with respect to utility, freedom, or equality, respectively. Such narrow, single-minded focus is deeply mistaken. The truth about morality is complex, and there isn't just one thing that matters morally. There are many things that matter regarding most moral issues. And what we need, as people concerned about fundamental moral issues, are not simple, pat answers, but careful, thoughtful, subtle consideration of all of the relevant factors. We need to be pluralists about moral values. That is, to think about issues pluralistically. So let me suggest one pluralistic model for thinking about today's topic. Historically, many philosophers have focused on 3 different approaches as morally fundamental. The first addresses the question, how ought the world to be? The focus here is on the value of outcomes, of what happens. The second addresses the question, what kind of person ought I to be? The focus here is on the character of moral agents. The third addresses the question, what ought I to do? The focus here is on the moral assessment of particular actions, and in particular, on the notion of agent-relative duties and obligations. These 3 approaches correspond, respectively, to what philosophers call consequentialist, virtue, and deontological moralities. Many argue issues in terms of just one of these approaches, but this is another mistake. The human enterprise of trying to figure out how to live properly and in harmony with ourselves, others, and the larger world requires that we take a broad perspective. The fully moral life, the fully human life, requires that we pay attention to each of these concerns, to what happens, whether as a result of what we do or fail to do, to the kind of person we are, whether virtuous or vicious, and to our duties and obligations to ourselves and others. So I submit that we need to address today's topic from all 3 perspectives. And when one does that, it becomes clear that there's a substantial moral reason to be concerned about the world's needy. For example, if you ask which outcome is better, one in which many innocent children painfully die of easily avoidable hunger and disease, or one in which affluent Americans have fewer toys and sweaters, eat out less, or have fewer kitchen appliances, it seems clear that on any plausible theory of the good, the latter outcome would be better than the former. Likewise, there's little doubt that among the most central and important virtues are the virtues of beneficence, sympathy, compassion, and generosity. But then if one takes seriously the notion that of the kind of person I ought to be, or the kind of life I ought to lead, is a virtuous one, surely at some point one must give priority to the easily preventable hunger and illness of innocent children over further acquisition of goods that one doesn't need, will hardly use, and wouldn't miss if one didn't have. For the truly virtuous person, ignoring the world's children is not an option. Finally, we turn to the trickiest category, the question of duty. Some people, like Jan Narveson, believe that it would be nice of us to benefit the needy, but that this lies within the domain of charity and is merely a matter of the heart. On his view, our duties consist in respecting rights. And while people have a strong negative right not to be interfered with, they do not have a positive right to be aided. As such, we do not violate anyone's rights or act unjustly if we fail to aid the needy. Now, many would dispute Narveson's claim and insist that people do have a positive right to aid. But I'm inclined to grant Narveson's terminological position and accept that the needy don't have a right against me for aid, and that I don't act unjustly if I ignore their plight. But I also believe that our duties and obligations extend significantly beyond merely respecting people's rights, and that people can and often do act deeply wrongly, even if they don't act unjustly. So-called positive duties to aid others are often regarded as weak, broad, and meritorious, while negative duties are regarded as strict, narrow, and unexceptionable. But these divisions are deeply misleading. Positive duties are still duties, and one acts wrongly if one fails to fulfill them. Moreover, a positive duty can be as strict or compelling as a negative duty. Likewise, failing to fulfill a positive duty can be worse, that is, significantly more open to moral criticism, than failing to fulfill a negative duty, even if the latter involves a violation of rights, and hence an injustice, while the former does not. To see this, consider variations of two classic examples. Suppose first, to borrow an example of Peter Singer's, John is one of 20 people walking by a pond in which a young child is drowning. If John can save the child, he has a duty to do so, even though the child has no special right against John or any of the others that he be saved. To be sure, if one of the others jumps in and saves the child, John is relieved of his responsibility of doing so. But if no one else jumps in, John must. So when John lets the child drown to preserve his suit, he acts wrongly, even though he has lots of company in that regard, and even though I am assuming he would not be violating the child's rights, and hence would not be acting unjustly if he failed to act. On the other hand, suppose Tom and Tim have been given a box of candy to share. Tom takes one extra piece. Since this piece belongs to Tim, Tom is, in essence, stealing. He is taking what doesn't belong to him, and in doing so, he violates Tim's rights, and he acts unjustly. Still, while Tom has violated a negative duty, and John has merely violated a positive duty, John's inaction, his failure to save the drowning child, is morally much worse than Tom's action of stealing a piece of Tim's candy. John's inaction is deeply and importantly wrong, and is open to much more serious moral criticism than Tom's is. This raises another important point. It is often assumed that the difference between positive and negative duties is that while the latter are strict and must be fulfilled in precise ways, the former allow for great leeway in how one fulfills them. So the former are thought to be like giving to charity, where it's optional as to where, when, how, and perhaps even whether one chooses to fulfill this duty. But this is a grave mistake. It conflates the category of positive duties, acts that we have a duty to perform, perhaps on behalf of others, with the category of supererogation, acts that are above and beyond the call of duty. It is true that positive duties are not typically construed as particular duties to particular people, but one cannot simply ignore them without acting wrongly, nor can one fulfill them in any way one wants. Suppose, to modify another famous example, I see 3 runaway trolleys running down the tracks. If I do nothing, the first trolley will plow into 5 people, killing them all. The second will hit 1 person, severing his foot, and the third will destroy an expensive car. Assuming that with little effort I can stop one and only one of the trolleys, and that I have no personal connection with anyone involved, it seems clear that I ought, morally, to stop the first trolley. Indeed, even assuming that no one has a right against me that I act at all, and hence that I cannot be accused of acting unjustly if I do nothing, it still seems clear that I act wrongly if I sit idly by and do nothing. Likewise, it seems clear that I would also act wrongly if I chose to save the car, or even if I chose to save the person's foot. Like negative duties, some positive duties are more pressing or urgent, and it's not up to me to simply choose to do anything at all, much less nothing at all. At least, it's not up to me if I don't want to be open to serious moral criticism. The preceding suggests that we do have duties and obligations to help others, and that we cannot simply choose whether and how to fulfill them. Almost certainly, if we want to act rightly, we must address the most urgent needs before addressing other needs. Almost certainly, this means that to fulfill our positive duties to aid others, we must address the easily preventable deaths of innocent children before we make our contributions to fostering literacy, promoting the environment, or, dare I say it, higher education. Does this mean that we can't give to other valuable causes that matter to us? No, but it suggests that we must do so as voluntary acts that are, in fact, above and beyond the call of duty. This requires that we may permissibly give to such causes only after first fulfilling our positive duty to respond to the most urgent needs of others. How much must we actually do regarding the latter before we can legitimately turn to the former? I'm not sure. But I think the old adage of giving till it hurts might be a useful place to start. Consistent with meeting our other duties and obligations, perhaps we must give to prevent starvation and illness at least up to the point where further giving would genuinely worsen our lives, perhaps significantly. At that point, if we choose to give further, perhaps we then have the option of giving to the cause of our choice. In sum, taking a pluralistic approach to morality, it seems clear that most of us should do much more to benefit the world's children. We should do this for consequentialist reasons, to make the world a better place. For virtuous reasons, because that's the kind of person one should want to be. And for deontological reasons, because aiding the needy is not simply an option. It's a duty that can be every bit as urgent and strict as our duties to respect rights and act justly. Part 4, we could do better. Americans like to think of themselves as the most generous people on the face of the earth. Whether or not that's so, it's interesting to look at how Americans spend their money to see whether they could do more to help the world's badly off. Virtually all of the following data is taken from the 2010 U.S. Statistical Abstract, where most recent data is for 2007. It is true that in 2007, Americans gave a total of $306 billion to philanthropic causes, either as individuals or through foundations, corporations, or charitable bequests. But the vast majority of that went to religious institutions, alma maters, and so on. And only a small fraction of it, $13.3 billion, went to international aid. Still, $13.3 billion sure seems like a big number. So let me note a few other numbers for comparison. In 2007, individual Americans spent $74 billion on toys and sports equipment, $323 billion on tobacco products, $457 billion on alcohol. You guys consumed a lot of that, I imagine. $300 to $600 billion on soft drinks, candy, chips, and other snack foods. $841 billion on recreation. And $2.7 trillion on McDonald's hamburgers. No, that's an exaggeration. $2.7 trillion on eating out, of which a lot of it is on McDonald's hamburgers. This means that individual Americans would have had to contribute as much as they spent in 2007 on international relief for approximately 353 years before they would have spent as much as they spent in 2007 alone on toys, tobacco, alcohol, snack foods, recreation, and eating out. Need I add the following obvious point? If Americans cut their consumption of junk food, restaurant food, tobacco, and alcohol by 25% and spent that money on international aid, this would increase the relief funds by more than 70 times to over $950 billion. Moreover, this would not only be much better for the starving masses of the world, it would be much better for the people in the United States in purely self-interested terms, as they would then be living much better, healthier lifestyles. So the very same action could not only save lives overseas, it could save lives right here in America. The preceding numbers may all seem too abstract to mean anything. So let me add a few trivial but revealing observations. Consider the following list of different products that Americans might have in their home, each of which serves the function of warming food or drink. Conventional oven, convection oven, crock pot, stove, wok, microwave, toaster, toaster oven, pizza maker, fry baby, running out fingers, coffee maker, roaster, espresso machine, popcorn maker, grill, bun warmer, rotisserie, bagel toaster, hot water dispenser, fondue pot, waffle iron, electric frying pan, rice cooker, omelet maker, corner bakery, electric griddle, crepe maker, cappuccino maker, teapot, coffee cup warmer, bread machine, egg poacher, steam table, etc. It's shocking to think of how many individual Americans own a large number of these items. Dismaying to think of how many they actually use, and appalling to think of how many they really need. Next, I note the following. For many years, I lived in Houston, Texas. It's bloody hot in Texas. Very hot. I didn't have much occasion to wear sweaters or coats. Indeed, most of the year I wore shorts and t-shirts. Yet some years back, when I was still living in Houston, I did an inventory of my closets. And I found 15 sweaters, 12 sweatshirts, 4 sweatsuits, and 11 jackets or coats. That's 42 things to keep me warm in a climate where I could easily have made do with 3. Finally, I confess, at the same time I inventoried my closets, I was going to count my children's Barbie dolls, stuffed animals, Beanie Babies, and other toys. But I realized that I didn't have the time or heart to do so. My wife and I don't buy our children all that much, but we don't need to. They have friends and neighbors and grandparents and aunts and uncles, and they live in America. And they celebrate birthdays and lots of holidays. It's embarrassing, indeed shameful and obscene, how much junk flows into my home each year for 3 children who don't need anything, when so many children worldwide face death from easily preventable causes. Part 5. But what about you? You're just a student. I know that some of you are thinking that this has nothing to do with you. You're just a poor student. What could you possibly do? I also know that some of you have had genuinely difficult lives. Some of you have suffered tragic losses in your lives. Some of you have suffered great poverty. Some of you have a mother or father who's an alcoholic or a junkie. Some of you may be facing a life-threatening disease. I don't want to minimize the troubles that many of you may have faced in your lives, or that many of you may be facing right now. But for most of us in this room here, the very fact that we are here tells us that we are incredibly well off by global standards. Most of us have a roof over our heads. Most of us have clothes that are not in tatters, or if they are, that's a matter of choice and style that we sometimes pay extra for. Most of us eat 3 meals a day and more than a few snacks. All of us escape the childhood diseases that kill over 30,000 people a day. None of us are living in a war-torn land, savaged daily by brutal sectarian violence. Numerous of us have our own computers, TVs, cell phones, Nintendos, PlayStations, or Xboxes. In sum, though it's easy to lose sight of us, most of us in this room are incredibly damn fortunate by any standards, but especially by world standards. Still, some of you are thinking, but I really am a poor student. What could I possibly do to help the hungry of the world? Well, the simple truth is that you could do a lot, and you wouldn't even notice it. At Christmas time, you could have parents or friends make a donation to one of the organizations recommended by Giving What We Can, instead of giving you a gift that you probably don't even care about. Or you could have them give you cash. You could spend half on yourself and half on the world's needy. Or you need to make any sacrifice. Just be more careful about when you buy your Christmas presents. For example, give yourself an empty box and then buy after the Christmas sales. Or do what my wife does. She buys all the presents beforehand, gives them to the kids, they open them up, they say goody, 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 and then she returns them all the day after and buys them at 30% off. They get the pleasure of opening it up, and they get it for 30% off. We get it for 30% off. They don't give a shit. Buy before Christmas, but be sure to buy on sale, or at an outlet store, or online, or using a coupon. The point is, you can get the very same stuff that you already get at 20% off or more. You could give the rest to an effective charity, and you could save a life. Do you buy CDs? Do you buy one a week? or one every 2 weeks. You could just delay your gratification by a bit. Buy one every 10 days or one every 3 weeks. Eventually, you'll still get the very same CD, but you'll just spread it out a little bit over time. Take the money you save, send it to an effective charity. Over the course of the year, you could save a life. Instead of buying the fancy designer jeans, you could buy the equally sturdy, God forbid, pennies version. Give the difference to an effective charity and save a life. Do you go to the movies? Go to the very same movie, but go to the matinee instead of opening night. You see the same movie, but you save 30%. Take the difference saved over a year, send it to an effective charity. You can save a life. Do you get a daily fix of Starbucks? Do you really need that daily fix? What if you just get your coffee on campus? Or God forbid, make your own? Or suppose you go every other day instead of every day? Or suppose you go every day, but you just get the regular instead of the large? Take the difference saved, send it to an effective charity. You can save a life. Or consider the benefits of a healthier lifestyle. Do you and your buddies go to the bar together? Do you all buy a round of drinks for each other? How about instead of buying 4 rounds of drinks, you just buy 3? You'll still get a nice buzz, I promise you. And you can take the 25% saved, you can send it to an effective charity, and you can save a life. In fact, over the course of a year, the money saved this way may save a lot of lives, including, sadly, perhaps your own. When you're heading over to a friend's house to watch the game, instead of taking a 6-pack, just bring 3. Take the money saved, send it to an effective charity. You can save a life. Do you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day? Cut it by 25% or in half. Send the money to an effective charity and save a life. And once again, over the course of many years, you might save many lives this way, including your own. I noted earlier that Americans spend over $2.7 trillion per year dining out. This averages out to approximately $8,710 per year for every man, woman, and child alive in America. That's $167 per week. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that you guys only spend a quarter of that amount, $40 a week. If you just spend 3/4 of that amount, say by ordering water for free instead of a drink for $2.50, 4 times a week. So your total bill was $30 a week instead of $40 on eating out. You'd save $10 a week. That's $520 a year. That's enough to save several lives. And it would be healthier for you. I could go on and on, but I take it the point here is plain enough. It's easy to say, I'm just a poor undergraduate and there's nothing I can do to help the needy. But that is just false. Every one of us in this room can do something to help save lives. And there are many ways in which we could do so where we wouldn't even notice the difference in our lives. Or where there would be no difference in our lives. Or where the difference that there would be would actually be better for us. So there's undoubtedly lots that we could do. The question is whether we will. Part 6, conclusion. The degree to which we're morally blameworthy for not aiding someone in need is partly a function of how dire the need is and how much it would cost us to do so. Not only monetarily, but in terms of humanly valuable projects, relationships, responsibilities, and commitments. But surely, by such criteria, we are open to serious moral criticism when we basically ignore, as most of us do, the tragic plight of innocent children suffering from easily preventable hunger or disease. Each of us could do vastly more than we currently do to help the world's children, and we could do so without making a dent in our affluent lifestyle. That we don't is a serious moral failing. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello. Now we get to the second part. Hopefully Larry has convinced you that this is a very serious issue, and there's a big question about what practically we can do about it. Larry suggested a lot of ways in which we can cut some of the things in our lives, even if they seem rather meager to us at the time, that there are potential ways we can do things. I want to talk to you about, in particular, how much you can achieve, to try to make that concrete and show you that you can make a really big impact, both now and particularly over your lives. So, by way of introduction, I'll first say how I became interested in charity. I'd always been interested in the plight of other people while a child and growing up. But I became particularly interested in politics when I was an undergraduate, and was quite idealistic about it. And my friends would often say to me, "Oh, well, if you think that, then why don't you give all of your money to people starving in Africa?" It was this kind of reductio of one's argument. You know, you say something that sounds very idealistic, and they say that. And it was meant to just shut me up. But I started thinking about this and thinking, why don't we take this seriously? Why don't we think that if we actually could help people abroad, that maybe we should do so, and think, across national boundaries, and really try to work out what impact we could have when it comes to helping people. So I started to take this idea seriously and think, well, what could I do if I really wanted to make a big difference? And I started thinking about this more and more as I went into philosophy and into ethics, reading the work of Peter Singer and Thomas Pogge, who ask these questions in very challenging ways, and also Peter Unger, as was mentioned earlier. And I started to have to think about this more seriously, and I wondered, what could I do over my life? So if I thought about it from my perspective at the time, I was about 26 when I was really thinking about this. And I tried to work out, well, how much could I do in different aspects of my life?
Could you bring up the mic closer to you?
Yeah.
Tell us if you can hear in the back.
Hello, is that any better? Is that better? It's about the same. Is that better? No. Okay. Is this any better now? Okay, good. Okay, problem solved. So luckily, you get to hear me before I say what I actually could do. So thinking about my life, different aspects, what could I do through my work as an academic? So partly research, partly teaching. What could I do through my personal relationships? How much could I improve people's lives? What could I do through volunteer work as part of my life? And what could I do through donations, donating some of the money that I earn? Thinking about these different aspects of my life. And in particular, I found that I could make the most progress in concretely looking at what I could do through donations. So over my career, I worked out I'd earn about £1.5 million. So that's about $2.25 million. And an academic in the US would definitely earn more than that. And I encourage all of you to sit down and actually just look at some expected salaries for different jobs you might be thinking of and try to calculate it. You'll probably find out it comes to a number that's larger than this if you don't go into academia in the UK, which earns a lot less than a lot of things that you could do with a good degree somewhere else. So I thought about this and thought, okay, with my £1.5 million that I'll earn, how much do I need for myself? And living as I was at the time, as a graduate student in Oxford, it's a good life, and it doesn't cost very much. And I realized that if I kept spending about the same amount on myself as I had been spending, I would only need about £500,000 over my life. And that actually is enough money to allow a bit of flexibility there, that my needs could increase a bit, and to adjust it with inflation and so on. And I came up with the number of £500,000. So this would mean that I'd have about £1 million over my life, which I could dispose of as I wished. And I could spend that on myself and increase my standard of living, or I could spend it on other people through some way. So I thought, what could I do with £1 million? And I want to show you some of what I found out with this. And you could think about it similarly for your own lives. This is about $1.5 million, and I'll try to convert into dollars from here in. So what I wanted to look at in particular was health-related charities operating in developing countries. And I found some really interesting things out about this. When it comes to looking at what you can do, you want some way of measuring it. So measuring health is a little bit tricky, but there are some ways that we can proceed to try to work out just how much can we do. And it gets particularly tricky when you think about a whole lot of different aspects and you try to compare them to each other. So maybe one charity works on directly fighting tuberculosis and thereby saving people's lives. Another charity works curing blindness or hunger or various different aspects. And we want to be able to actually kind of look at what we can do overall. So one question you could have is how many lives can we save? And I will actually come back to that a bit later. But there are some problems with looking at that question. So one of them is this thing here. So people in public health will have this truism that no one's ever saved a life. That we try to do so. So a patient comes into the hospital and they've just had a heart attack, and the crash cart comes out and the surgeon operates, and they continue to live for another 20 years and then they die, right? So there's this situation where we can extend people's lives rather than saving them, is what really happens. So you can think about this in cases, very small cases. Suppose that a car is coming along the road and someone's standing in front of it, and you run into the middle of the road and you push them out of the way. You push them 5 meters further down the road, and then the car hits them just a little bit later. In that case, you've kind of saved their life, but also put them back in danger again. And you might have extended their life for a second or something. So you can see that would be pretty useless. It's not just a question of saving a life versus not saving a life. We really care about how much life is gained by doing this. So what we could do is we could change that and say, how many life years can we save? That might be a more sensible way to look at it. However, there's still some problems with this. I said earlier about things like curing blindness is something that we might think is really important. So we care about the quality of the life. Not just that there are life years. If we had an operation which could help someone extend their life, but with really serious complications, that's not as good as if there was another operation we could perform which wouldn't have those serious complications, it would have higher quality. And there are things like the blindness, which are improvements to health, but don't extend the person's life. They just improve the life while they're living it. So there are a couple of these other areas that we want to think about. So we're not just interested in life years, but we're interested in how good the life years are. So this is something you might have heard about in ethics called quality adjusted life years, or QALYs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this talk and say some things in terms of QALYs. So this takes into account both quality and quantity. And it's the standard approach in public health. Once people have thought about these things, a lot of health economists and ethicists, people in public health, are interested in doing it this way. It's what the World Health Organization uses, basically. So you can imagine schematically a life extending over time and has a different kind of level of quality of health. And in this case, this continues along and has a dip with a serious illness in the middle of the person's life, and then you can see later on as they get ill and then die. So this is a schematic, very schematic, abstract view of someone's life. But you can see this idea that what's important is that there's more kind of area under this curve, that their life is longer and kind of makes this shape bigger, or that the life is better quality. These are things which are important. So you can measure it in this way. And if you were to compare this to a different life they could live, perhaps if you didn't give them a certain operation and there was a smaller area under this, you could kind of see how much improvement there was in terms of this scale. And that's the idea of a quality adjusted life year. You think of a year of life at full quality. Or you think of the improvements that you could make. Say bringing something from half quality of life up to full quality of life for a year would count as half a QALY. That's the basic idea. So you can see here kind of two schematic lives, and you could improve a life by increasing the quality, or you could improve it by increasing the quantity, the length of the life. And then you can measure this according to the area. So that's just the basic idea. But now we've got an idea of a unit that we can think about in terms of health. It's like a year of life at full health, or an equivalent to that. So what is this worth? Well, in the UK, we have a public health service, and it puts a value on this. And they say that if a new drug comes out, and that drug costs less than $30,000 per QALY, they'll fund it. So they're effectively saying, we'll fund everything there. If it goes up to 45,000, we'll probably still fund it. If it goes beyond 45,000, we don't have enough money left to fund things which are at that level of effectiveness. So that's how they do it. And sometimes they spend more, as I say. In the States, people spend a lot more than that, typically. But this is to give you a kind of a ballpark figure. Now, there are 8,760 hours in a year. So we can actually use this to work out how much they spend in the UK on health per hour. And it's $3.50 for an hour of healthy life. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty good deal. So it costs a lot more than that to go to the cinema for an hour and see a film. And it seems like it's a lot better to just get an extra hour of life at full health than it is to take a normal hour of life and turn it into a movie-going hour. Yeah. So that seems pretty good to me. I think it's worth at least that much. There's a question about how much would you spend on this? And you might not have $30,000 yet, so it's hard to work out whether you'd spend $30,000 to get a year. But you might think about this in terms of the hours and think that actually if someone just gave you an option right now to buy some of these hours, if they were just here on the table, would you buy some? And I certainly would. I'd be very tempted by this. Alternatively, you might imagine a scenario like this where you've got one option is to have a salary of $30,000 for the rest of your life. The other option is to have a salary of $45,000 for the rest of your life, but to be blind for the rest of your life. And it seems that there's a lot of things that you wouldn't be able to do then, a lot of disadvantages that you'd suffer. And I know in my case, I would go for the salary of $30,000, but be able to see for the rest of my life rather than the other way around. If you think the same thing, then you're valuing one of these quality adjusted life years at least $30,000. That's just to put that into perspective as to what it's worth to you. And I think at least $30,000. Now, what does it cost? So we know what it's worth, but that's different to what it costs. So if things cost less than what they're worth, then we should buy them. You know, they're good deals. If they cost more than what they're worth, then they're not good deals for us. So what does it cost? So we can get one for less than $30,000. So let's look at a case study of preventing and curing HIV/AIDS. Now, as you know, a major cause of death and disability in developing countries. I don't need to labor the point. And there are many approaches to preventing it or curing it that can be done. So I want to try to show you schematically these different approaches and how effective they are and how much it costs. So the first one I've got here, the first bar, is treatment of Kaposi sarcoma, which is a particular illness that you get, well, you can get if you have AIDS. It's called an AIDS-defining illness, which means the type of illness which you typically don't get unless your immune system is hurt so much that we would say that your HIV has progressed to AIDS because your immune system is so compromised. You could directly try to treat that, but it's not that cost-effective to do it. Or you could try to use antiretroviral therapy, which is going more directly to try to decrease your viral load and make you healthier. So these are two different ways in which you could deal with one problem, the big problem being AIDS. Now, to show you a sense of scale on this graph, this line here is the barrier of $30,000 per QALY. So this shows you that the first treatment is almost up to that level of effectiveness. The second treatment far surpasses it. So both of these treatments would be funded in the UK and they'd both be funded in the US. And I think they'd actually both be good deals. If you were suffering from these things, you should pay for it. It's worth it to you if you value your health, as I suggest that we all do. But you can do better than this in terms of dealing with HIV. So let's zoom out on this chart and then look at another option, which is prevention of transmission during pregnancy. So there are various ways in which you can try to avoid the transmission of HIV to the child. and you can improve the effectiveness much more because it's quite cheap to do. You only have to do it for a short period of time. Then we can zoom out further and look at the distribution of condoms is another intervention, which is much more effective again. You can see it's vastly more cost effective than antiretroviral therapy. So that's interesting. And also note that this line about the appropriate amount of cost effectiveness, you can barely see it anymore. It's still there. There's a slight blue line. And these things are just vastly more cost effective than what we were looking at before. Now we can zoom out again and look at education for high-risk groups. So it's a kind of very high-level strategy, is to go to groups such as sex workers in developing countries and educate them about the risks of HIV and about the benefits of using condoms. So this is another approach which is much more cost-effective again. And you might wonder, can we get any more cost-effective than this? And it turns out that as far as we know, we can't within the area of HIV. However, if we're willing to look beyond that, then we can get more cost-effective. So you'll note that I've left a blank row here, right? So it's not that surprising that there's going to be something else. But we need to zoom out quite a lot to see it, like this, which is treatment for parasitic infections. What are these parasitic infections? 33 million people have HIV. 1.4 billion people have neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs. And this is a class of diseases, most of which are infections caused by parasitic worms inside the body. One of them is bacterial. And these worms are various sizes. They range from microscopic to really quite large worms in the intestines, which is as disgusting as it sounds. I don't have any pictures, you'll be happy to know. I talked to someone who works in an organization that treats these things, and she said that she'd showed pictures at a school and one of the teachers threw up. And she wasn't allowed to do that again. So bearing that in mind. But it can be pretty disgusting. They cause pain, blindness, and disfigurement. You may have heard of, there's a disease called lymphatic filariasis, also called elephantiasis, which causes a kind of really disfiguring swelling of the legs and genitals, and it's a very disgusting kind of illness. People, get quite horrified by their own appearance, and it also causes them to often be outcast from their groups. So there's kind of serious things that can happen to you with these illnesses. They also cause various types of organ damage. And what's interesting is that they're very cheaply treatable. You can go to areas where 80% of the population are suffering from these things, and you can go into the schools and get the schools to hand out treatments such that once each year the children are treated. And it turns out after being treated each year for about 7 years through school that you become roughly immune to these illnesses, and you get a lot of benefits through your life. And the amount needed for each treatment is 25 cents. So it becomes very cheaply treatable. Getting the illness isn't as bad as getting AIDS, but it's so much cheaper to treat that you can treat many more people and create a larger health benefit by treating it for a given amount of money. So earlier, the total treatment here comes to $3.40 per QALY, per year of life at full health, $3.40. And you'll recall from earlier that this is what we'd pay for an hour of life. So we were just saying before that it would be a good deal to get an hour of life for $3.50. Well, for $3.40 you can get a year of life, so long as you get it for someone else and not for yourself. So just to remind you about hours and years, this is what they look like. That's the difference between an hour and a year. It's about a factor of 10,000. So what can we learn from this? Well, health programs in developing countries can be amazingly cost effective. I took you from a level of cost effectiveness equivalent to a lot of health treatment in developed countries, which I was saying is actually quite cost effective, and we'd want to pay that much, up to a level which is 10,000 times more effective. So 10,000 times more so than here in the US, not the UK, 10,000 times more effective than is needed to be a good deal, and that our money is worth much more than we might have thought beforehand. I hope you would think so. Each $3.40 that we have is a year of life at full health. So if you think about how much money is in your wallets at the moment, there's probably enough to kind of be more than the rest of your lives worth of life at full health. But only if it's used on the best programs, not if it's used on some of the less effective programs. You saw that there's this kind of crazy discrepancy between and disparity between the different health programs as to how much they can achieve. So now I want to take you to charity. So you've had a bit of a look at how to measure health and so on and impact, but I want to get back to some practical things. So these differences in effectiveness were aimed at policymakers when people were first studying this. But they're not just of interest to policymakers, they're interest to all of us when we come to think about charity and giving. When we donate money, we're trying to help people and to help them as much as we can. If you were told that there's 2 ways to help this person and one of them helps them less, we wouldn't do it. And suppose we wanted to donate money to help fight HIV/AIDS. Well, it would matter to us whether the program was aimed at fighting Kaposi's sarcoma or whether the program is aimed at education for high-risk groups. It's not enough to just hear, this charity supports people suffering from AIDS. It actually really matters if there's another charity down the street that also helps people with AIDS, as to which interventions they're using, which ways are they using of trying to help people. Because one of these things, could save 100 times as many lives. Really 100 times as many lives, or 1,000 times as many is possible. Also, if we really want to help people, we should consider changing our focus from HIV to neglected tropical diseases if we can help more people. Why do we really care exactly what infection they've got if we find out that we can actually help more people in one of these cases than we can in the other, or help those people by a larger amount? So I want you to think about when you might give to charity and you put a coin into a bucket. And you can think about these different charities in different groups. So I want you to think about 5 different buckets. And there's a little blue square next to it is the benefit that it produces when you donate to the first type of charity. And then there's another type of charity which will produce 10 times as much benefit. Another type that will produce 10 times that amount of benefit. Another type that will produce 10 times that amount of benefit. And then a final type which produces 10 times that amount of benefit. So this is a really large discrepancy, and this is what we actually find if you look at different ways of helping in health in developing countries, is that there is this amazing discrepancy with the most effective ones 10,000 times as much as the least effective. And one thing that you really can learn from this is the question about where to give ends up being even more important than if you give. So suppose you were going to be giving to the middle one of those charities, this kind of rather small kind of blue square. It's a bigger difference actually going from that middle one to the best one than it is just going from the middle one to nothing at all. So where we give can be even more important than whether we give at all. Do we get our money's worth in general? Well, we don't. Instead, it's spread out something like this, with much of the money going towards interventions in the middle of this range of cost effectiveness, and very little actually getting to the most effective things. Although what's amazing is that even though very little gets to the most effective things, they still produce a large proportion of the benefit, because any amount of money that does get there produces a giant benefit. So what does all of this mean? Where are we going with all of this? Well, our money's worth an incredible amount, but only if not used on ourselves, which is quite interesting, and only if it's spent very wisely, if we really actually spend time thinking about this. Also, we can get something like 10,000 times the benefit for others that we can for ourselves. You can think of this as a 1,000,000% improvement if you want to think about percentages. I mean, when I first started looking at this, I thought maybe one of these things will be 50% bigger, or maybe 3 times as big if you look at the best one compared to the average one. I wasn't expecting to see that the best ones are about 100 times as effective as the average ones, and the worst ones are about 100th as effective. But it's a 1,000,000% improvement, or it's equivalently, it's like a 99.99% off sale compared to what we normally would spend our money on. And we can turn our hours into years. Now also, we can do amazing things. So while living in the US and doing what you want to do and living an affluent lifestyle, you can do amazing things. You might have thought that in order to really have a big impact, you'd have to become an aid worker, move to a country that has a much lower standard of living, not get to see your friends and family as much, not be able to do the career that you'd always kind of dreamed of doing, things like that, making these really big sacrifices of that kind. But I want to show you what you can do even if you live in the US, do what you want to do with your life, and live an affluent lifestyle. So you could do all of that and give away 10% of your future income. And if you did so, you'd be able to save around about 50,000 years of life at full health while living an affluent lifestyle in the US. This is equivalent to about 500 centuries of life at full health, or realistically, about 500 millennia of life improved by 10% quality. So this is a really big difference that you could make to the world. And it'd be spread over something like 50,000 people. Now, you might be wondering, how can you do this? How is it that money can make such a big impact compared to other things like volunteering and other aspects of our lives where it's just really hard to have this kind of impact? Well, I think that this slide really helps to explain that. So this is a slide which I think is the most important thing in kind of a summary of economics in the world. I think it should be on the front page of economics textbooks, which is the world income distribution. And on this type of graph, a completely equal distribution would just be a horizontal line. But we don't find that. We find that it's skewed towards the rich. So this is just with everyone in the world is lined up in terms of income, increasing income. And we've got this chart. It measures income per household member, and it's done with US dollars in purchasing power parity. So that means that in India, money goes about 4 times further than it does in the US. So if you take some US dollar there, you'll get 4 times as much bread or something like that. So that's already been taken into account. They've adjusted the incomes for that so that you can really compare them with each other. And then what you find is this amazing discrepancy. And I should say that you can see there's a ... at the end. It actually continues off the graph. In fact, it continues so high that at this scale, it would be taller than Mount Everest if you actually extended it until you got to all the people included. So there's this incredible skew with the income distribution. And you can see that the people who are particularly rich, they're really wealthy compared to the world's poorer people, and that's how it can make such a difference, because they're effectively, we're all effectively millionaires compared to the people in the world's poorest country. So it's not that surprising that using our money can help a lot compared to our time, because we're just really cash rich compared to other people. And you might think, if you try to work out where you'll be on this chart, that you'll be somewhere in this shoulder of the curve. You're not going to be that rich, but realistically, you're all going to be in this part of the distribution, in the richest 2% of the world's population. In fact, when I started looking at this, I tried to work out where I was as a graduate student, and I found that I was in the richest 4% of the world's population, and that while I was a student, and that if I'd be doing even better actually if I was over here at Rutgers. I was in the richest 4% of the world's population, and if I were to give 10% of my income, which seems kind of impossible sometimes when you're a student, but if I were to give 10% of my income, I'd still be in the richest 5% of the world's population. So 95% of the world's population were able to live on less than that, even adjusted for living standards in different countries. So it just seemed that actually, I could probably do that. So what was my response to all of this? Well, I said that I was starting off thinking about what I could do with my money and how should I spend this extra money. And I thought that really in order to live up to my values, I would have to give away more than half of my future income. In particular, about the £1 million of the £1.5 million. So I decided that I would do that, and I made a pledge to do it. And I've set up a society for people who want to join me. And the idea is that it's for people who want to make a serious, to make global poverty and dealing with it a serious part of their lives. And so the idea is that the basic pledge is to commit to giving at least 10% of your income to wherever it is that can do the most to help fight global poverty. So none of the money comes to the society. The society is just a group of people who all have a common interest. But they just donate to wherever it is that they think will make the most impact. And it would also run a website to collect and share the best information in the world on cost effectiveness of different charities. Because you might think, I said you've got to give very wisely, and you might think, well, how long did it take to do all of this research? The answer is quite a long time, but you don't, we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So the research that I did is just up there on the website to share with examples of charities which are working on these neglected tropical diseases and other examples of some of the most effective things that people can be working on. So the society is called Giving What We Can. And it has these two different aims. The first aim is to get people to give more. So the idea of making a pledge to give at least 10% of your income. And the second aim is to get people to give more effectively. So to focus on the most effective charities. And together, these aims are really complementary. So if you think about this, you can increase the amount people give, and then you could also increase the amount of cost effectiveness. And the total impact improves a lot. And these ideas work really well together. It's greater than the sum of its parts. It's equal to the product of its parts. So the reaction to all of this has been really good. We launched the society in November 2009. There was a lot of interest. There was coverage in all the major UK broadsheets and Sky News and BBC World News and things like this. And we had about 20 members at the time of launch, including a number of prominent philosophers and development economists who you might know. Peter Singer, Thomas Pogge, who really influenced me through their writing, are members. And Michael Kramer and Rachel Glenister, a couple of prominent development economists, and quite a few other people started off, including my wife, who's been with me all along. And since then, we've more than quadrupled the number of members. And now we've got 101 members from 9 different countries. And the total pledges so far, as Nick said at the start, come to $30 million so far, which is pretty good. That's an average of about $300,000 each that people are pledging to give over their lives from this 10%. So that's a lot. I mean, you might think, how could that even be right? Some of us are pledging to give more than that, like myself, so that helps to increase the numbers as well. And $30 million, what could you do with that? Well, you could save 8 million years of life at full health. That's a lot, and I'm pretty proud of this group of people for getting together to try to do something like that. So we could just do that if we want to donate to these groups working on neglected tropical diseases. Alternatively, there are some groups who do some things fighting tuberculosis and the control of tuberculosis, and they've got a really good figure for how much it costs to save a life. As I say, there are questions. It's not like the best metric to use, but if you do want to convert as a direct case of saving lives, it costs about somewhere between $150 and $750 to save a life using the direct observed treatment method called DOTS for tuberculosis. And so this would come to between 40,000 and 200,000 lives saved. That's quite a lot. So that's between 400 lives and 2,000 lives per member that we could save if we donated to fight tuberculosis. And to put this into some kind of comparison, if you think about the horrors of World War II and things that happened then, you get cases where we tend to think of it as a time where a lot of really bad things happened, but also there was some opportunity for people to do really heroic actions. The type of heroic actions that we tend to think are just totally out of our reach now. It's not the type of thing we could achieve in the world as it is. As an example, people talk about Oskar Schindler, who saved about 1,200 lives. What's interesting is that actually anyone in this room through their career, well, at least if you're young enough, all the students, if you start early, then you could save more than 1,200 lives. So you can actually have a bigger impact than that. And it's just quite interesting when we think about it, we spend a lot of time idolizing our heroes, but we don't spend that much time thinking, well, I guess I could do that if I really wanted to. Maybe I should do that. So in summary, we in the rich countries in the world are exceptionally wealthy compared to people in developing countries. There's a huge discrepancy. Our money can do thousands of times more for them than it can for us, but only if it's given wisely. So where to give is even more important than if you give. Also, the world is a very unfair place with a great deal of suffering, but we can each do a tremendous amount to help make it better. So let's do so.
Hey.
I'm on? Yeah. Just want to, first of all, congratulate both of you for your work, especially with this organization, the impact. It's amazing. What I wanted to point out is Mr. Temkin, he spoke about, easily preventable misery and also the responsibility that we have. And Mr. Ord was, among other things, concerned with cost effectiveness. Now, I wanted to bring up another thinker, Aristotle. He said that the main point is not so much to make incomes equal among the people, but to try to adjust their desires, which is what I think Mr. Temkin was trying to get at. That if we adjust our desires and we realize how much crap we have that we don't need, we can make a difference. Now, it seems that the only way we can do that is through education. And so my point is, or what I want to ask or suggest or whatever, is I think that education is what is going to make really a difference here. How come our universities, or what kind of responsibility do our educators and our universities have in not making it a requirement for our students, especially in the developing countries, to not even take one ethical course, one course in moral, ethics, or philosophy? So, how come we're not taking up that issue about educating our kids on what is ethical, what is moral, and how much, and just to realize how cost effective it would be if each person that goes to college takes one ethical course, one course in moral theory or whatever, into making them, realize and adjust their desires and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to point that out. Just why aren't we doing more, I guess, in that area?
It's a damn good question. I don't know why we're not doing. I mean, the actual answer to the question of why we're not doing more is probably has to do with political reasons, because we live in a day and age where people are pessimistic or they're cynical and they think that, oh, well, you can't teach ethics and blah, 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 and that's the parents' responsibility or the church's responsibility, but I don't want my kids having the propaganda thrown at them. I mean, there's all sorts of explanations. It is interesting. I mean, there are many schools in this nation, often many private schools, often many religious affiliated schools that do require ethics, that do require philosophy. Some require 2 or 3 courses of philosophy or ethics. But your general point, I mean, the question of why, that's a complicated question having to do with history, culture, everything else. But the real issue that you raise here, which is very important, is, and it was implied by Toby's, the best way of responding to AIDS is an education of things rather than, treatment of HIV, vis-a-vis antiviral stuff. And there's no doubt that education can have a huge role to play. And I take it that one of the reasons that Toby can sleep at night, and one of the reasons I tell myself I can sleep at night, I say, why aren't I doing more, is that I sometimes fool myself into believing that if I could just reach a few students, that I can make a difference that way, in addition to anything I would do in any of these other ways. But I think it's a great comment. Thanks.
Thank you.
My question is for either of the 2 lecturers. So everybody knows that Africa is very strained for resources. If we donate only to the charities that save the most lives effectively, then aren't we kind of increasing quantity while at the same time decreasing quality, since Africa will be more and more strained for resources? Do you think that it's necessary to couple the giving to like neglected tropical diseases with giving to charities that do structural reforms?
Yep. Okay. So it's a good question. So I should say that I was looking at various questions to do with health as a paradigm example. But given what we can, we're not restricted to health. You can try to donate to what you think will have the most impact fighting poverty in the long run. And that could be campaigning for political change, education, empowering of women. There are lots of possibilities which have plausible claims on this. But the data is also a lot weaker on these things, so it's less easy to see what we could do. So I kind of really want to show we could do at least this much in the case of the health things. Now, the question about whether donating could make things worse in various ways, this is something where I think that we can really avoid having to worry about that. So as an example, if you donate to fight neglected tropical diseases, this doesn't extend people's lives by very much. The real benefit is improving the quality of their life rather than extending it. So that's a case where it also helps to empower these people. So that I didn't mention this in the talk, but an amazing result is that there's a group who work at MIT called Poverty Action Lab who use science and applied scientific method to working out what works in development. So they do randomized controlled trials of different approaches. And they did this great trial looking at the situation of schooling and education and how do you get the children to stay at the schools and attend the classes. So they looked at a whole lot of different approaches, some of which were very popular in the development literature at the time. And they found that of all of these things, the one that worked the most was something which hadn't been talked about that much, which was actually these drugs to get rid of intestinal worms. And they found that for every $3, it turned out again to be about $3.50 that was spent, you could give an extra year of schooling for a child. So it's around about 1 cent for each extra day of school attendance is what it came out to. So that's kind of amazingly cost effective in that regard. So that's something where I think that if you're worried about overpopulation or some issues like this, you're not quite sure how that works, then giving to something like fighting these neglected tropical diseases is both really good in terms of empowering the people, improving their quality of health, not actually leading to more people though, but leading to also much more education. And so it just seems to be like something that kind of answers a lot of those types of concerns that people might have.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, good evening. I have a two-part question. So here it goes. I think the first part, the first approach to ending poverty and preventing any more people from dying of easily prevented diseases and lack of resource is asking the question, why are these people in this situation in the first place? And I think everyone in the room can see that by sacrificing one small materialistic want, that they can save a life by giving that money to a charity instead. But we know that money is not what is going to solve the problem, it is what is done with the money. So why can't we just directly implement the outcome of what the money would eventually do? For example, giving them the information that would help them become independent from the system that put them in poverty in the first place. How to find their own food, water, shelter in an agricultural, simplistic sense.
Okay.
That's the answer.
This is, when it comes to what we should donate for in this case, in some of these cases, I would say that the system does cause a lot of problems, depending on what we mean by the system. But trade laws, for example, international trade laws are really quite unfair to poor countries. So something that might be one of the best things to donate to is groups who are lobbying for major political change about these things. So that's an example where you could really want to directly challenge the system there. And maybe that's even more effective than directly trying to help people. What can be quite surprising though is, in the case of trying to get extra benefits in terms of farming and so on, teaching people more effective use of the land. Hygiene promotion is known to be really cost effective, more cost effective than producing wells and toilets and things, is just teaching people about proper hygiene. So there are definitely these ways to try to make things more self-sufficient can be good, but it's not obvious that it's going to be the best outcome. It might be that actually curing diseases is more effective. It's not obvious, and that's why it's really nice to be able to go to the data and just try to find out about that.
So I'll just say, there's a long line, so in general, I don't think we'll try to each comment on everything, but I'll just say a word about this one. So you're absolutely right that there's Toby's thoughts and my thoughts are not saying that if we all dip into our pockets today, tomorrow we'll face utopia. There'll be no problems. There won't be any issues that still have to be dealt with that might require a lot more concerted effort at many levels, political, social, economic, and so on. That's not the view. It's not a Pollyanna view here. We're not saying we can change the world and make everything better. What we're saying is that each one of us can make a difference. I know people, I know the president of Oxfam, which is a major international relief organization, and they fight all the time with how to be effective, and sometimes in order to be effective, they have to go into these countries that are run by warlords, and in essence they have to bribe and pay off these warlords or they can't do any good in that particular country. And then the question is, at some point, sometimes they have to say, we have to abandon these innocent people who will die without our aid because we'll do more harm than good if we're in there buying off the warlords. Well, Toby and I are not saying that we're in a position right now to settle the problem of warlords in the world. They're there and they're going to be there probably for the foreseeable future. But what Toby has identified is a whole lot of cases where people can be helped easily, readily, now by us. It seems crazy that just because we can't solve all of the world's ills, we shouldn't solve any of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. So I'm thinking in donating money to people who are dying of tropical diseases, you're saving a lot more people than people who are dying of AIDS. But is there any value that you can assign or say that, like, because people who die of tropical diseases are spread out all over the world, and because people who are dying of AIDS are perhaps more concentrated, is there any value in thinking that, I think, I'm probably completely wrong, but is there any value in saying that, like, if you help one disease, if you help prevent one disease, you're preventing extermination of people instead of just saving more people but more spread out?
Mm-hmm. So I should say that when looking at these figures, what they particularly tell us is the kind of first approximation as to what's going on. How much can we help? And it's not obvious that that's the only consideration, is just how much benefit we can produce, this cost effectiveness. Maybe there are other considerations. Maybe there is some reason why we might have some special obligations to some of the people, or there could be some extra issues to do with distributional effects and so on. And an example of that is that in the case of AIDS, there's particular chance of losing a very large number of people at working ages and only having children and elderly people left, which would have extra bad effects on communities. So there can be some extra reasons. However, I should also say that there's a difference between the question of what should everyone do and the question of what should you do. So if you make a choice to donate money to neglected tropical diseases, to fighting them, then that won't make everyone do the same thing. So there's a question about at the margins, given the distribution of benefits is like it currently is, would it be better for you to help more people in that area or fewer people in the case of AIDS? And I think that given the state of the world as it is and the state of kind of how people are donating, it makes more sense to push it, to nudge it as much as we can in the direction of the more cost-effective things.
At the risk of violating, I'm going to add one comment here. I do think that the issue of what we're addressing here, sort of what can you as an individual here do, is a different question than the issue of how might politicians, governments, international agencies affect things. But for the question of what might I do if I want to make a big difference here,
you could go to his website and find out a good answer. Yeah.
Hi. My question is sort of directed at both. Oscar Wilde wrote an essay called The Soul of Man Under Socialism, in which he talks about the ability of private charity to alleviate the worst aspects of an unjust system while still allowing that unjust system to perpetuate itself. So I'm wondering if that could be relevant here. I mean, how much of our efforts should be devoted at, improving these people's lives with the most cost-effective measures possible, while still seeking to avoid, fostering and reproducing this system of global inequality that produced these people's terrible lives in the first place?
Well, that's a good question. And what's kind of interesting is that to some degree it's an empirical question as to how much could we actually go about changing the system if we wanted to, and how effective could we be in that. And I don't know the answer to that. It's not an empirical question I know the answer to, but there is something there. It just seems if it were actually relatively easy to change the system, if say the 100 members of Giving What We Can had a 1% chance of like overthrowing the trade laws if we all work together, then we should be switching all of our money into that. I think that we don't have that higher chance, but maybe we could do quite a bit. So it is an interesting question, and we want to look further into this. The questions about kind of lobbying and overthrowing some systems and so forth as to how much that could achieve. Although, if you think about the difference of not giving at all versus giving to fight neglected tropical diseases, and which one's going to help support the system more, I think actually you'll be supporting the system more by doing nothing than by doing some of these charitable things. So it's not obvious that his kind of point always holds, that it actually does help support the system by trying to help kind of alleviate the symptoms.
Yeah, I'm dying to comment on that, but there's such a long queue.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later about that. I've got an answer for you a bit more.
This question may have already been asked, so if that has been, just absolutely feel free to tell me so. I have a question, and I know it's kind of a gross oversimplification, but one of the problems that I have thinking about, let's say, donating and helping people in the rest of the world, combat certain diseases and different issues. How can you weigh that against the demands that a growing population is going to put on the earth? In the sense that, okay, so you're helping all these people, and now they're healthy enough so that they can live to the reproductive age and then reproduce and then create more people in a situation like that.
Okay, well, I think I did talk a little bit about this, but I can say a little bit more on it. One of the things on our website for Giving What We Can, which you might guess, it's just givingwhatwecan.org. So you probably don't even need to write that down. But we have lots of nice resources there, including a calculator where you can type in your income and it tells you how rich you are in the world's population and so on. But one of the things we have there is this page called Myths About Aid. And we look at a lot of these myths, such as that aid is having no impact and that too much money is being spent and things like this. And we actually go in and look at kind of what the grain of truth is, but then also to go a bit further and what's the full picture on it. So in the case of overpopulation, we do actually have quite a bit on that, which is, I'll try to give you some of the flavor of it. But in the case of overpopulation, one thing to say is what I said before: you could donate to groups which don't actually increase the number of people, at least by a very small amount compared to the health improvements. Another thing to say is that there's something called the demographic transition, which is that countries tend to have either kind of poor countries with large numbers of children or kind of rich countries with small numbers of children. And it seems that what actually tips it over the edge is once the probability of the children surviving gets high enough, this is a major factor, as is the availability of contraception. But it turns out that actually by having children survive more often, it leads to fewer people overall in the world because the women choose to have fewer children. This seems a bit surprising, but it's to do with, you have to consider, you want to have a high enough chance that a couple of your children will survive until you're a grandparent. And it turns out if you work that out, you realize that you need to have fewer children in the case, fewer surviving children, in fact, in the case where the survival rate's higher. So it actually looks like making more children survive will help with overpopulation rather than hurt it. And if you don't believe that, then you could donate your money to things like condom distribution, which also helps fight AIDS and also reduces overpopulation. So there's just like heaps of options for people who are worried about it, I think.
Yeah, but you are asking a familiar question. The Malthusian worried that for each person we save today, 6 people will die tomorrow. And the economist, Nobel Prize winning economist Amartya Sen has published quite extensively on the issue that Toby has talked about here, suggesting that the actual empirical evidence is that that's false. As Toby says, and as Amartya and others have shown, if you could secure children's lives so that parents aren't afraid that they're all going to die before they reach the age of 5, population tends to steady. And it's also accompanied by other issues, education of women, things of that sort.
I mean, it's also worth pointing out that the population is currently 7 billion and it's expected to actually peak at 9 billion. So it's not going to double again. We're talking more like a 20% type increase. And the number of children per woman in the world, if you go back to the 1960s, was I think 8 children per woman, and now the world average is 2.4 children per woman, bearing in mind that about 2.3 or 2.2 is like the replacement rate. We're in a very different world to what we were before, and there are a lot of these concerns which are still being kind of represented in the media as if the demographic facts were what they were 30 years ago or 50 years ago, but actually things have changed a lot, and it's just taking a long time for people to really realize that and look at the figures.
All right, thank you so much.
That's fine. Okay.
Oh, we're told that's the last question. I'm sorry.
No, the next one's.
No. Go ahead, and then the rest of you can come up after.
You can come up afterwards. Yeah.
Well, my question is more of a suggestion than a question.
Great.
So, I think it's a great idea to reach out, in the academic community for something like this, because, as you pointed out earlier, that we will be, or students will be in, the top 2 percentile. Most college students will be in the top 2 percentile of the world's richest people. So, but I was thinking if we want to make a more, direct impact, we could start reaching out to ordinary folk. And I mean, I work at the dining hall and I make about $5,000 a year, but I mean, if we assume that most middle-class Americans make $30,000 to $50,000 a year, they're obviously going to be able to make a way more of an impact than I could. So, I think maybe that we could possibly reach these people by, understanding their moral psychology. So, like we see with Glenn Beck that people are motivated into action. Well, folk instead of educated people are usually motivated into action by effective rhetoric, rather than rational rhetoric. So I was thinking maybe we could use empirical work, such as the work of Jesse Prince or Sean Nichols or Jonathan Haidt, to elicit certain to figure out how to elicit certain emotions into people, the general folk into giving what they can.
It's a good question. I mean, one of the reasons that we focus on talking to students is that we're both academics, and so we've got a steady supply of students, and it's a bit harder to organize an event which a lot of people go to with the general public. Although I've been talking with the media a lot and done some small documentaries and other projects and things, trying to get the message out and try to explain it more. And I think that your points about trying to use a bit of rhetoric are probably good. It's not really my style. I'm quite a lot better at the rational discussion than the rhetorical one. But another point, just taking on board everything you're saying, I'll just say another advantage of talking to students in particular, while students often haven't started earning yet, that's actually in some ways an advantage, because if you try to make a commitment to give something like 10% and you've already committed to a mortgage and so on, and you've bought the house based on what you expect your income will be for the rest of your life, it's really difficult to move backwards in that regard. Whereas if you get people interested in this while they're young, and certainly for me, I mean, people ask me, has it been really difficult now that you've decided to give away a lot of your money? Giving away something like a third of my money at the moment. And the answer is no, because I'm actually living on more money than I was living on as a student. So like my standard of living is still going up. It's just going up slower than for most people when they make that transition. But it's actually quite a lot harder to do the moving backwards thing. So I think that is a real advantage that students have, is that it's just easier to make this kind of commitment when you're young. But thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for showing up tonight.
If you didn't get a chance to ask a question or you're interested in continuing the conversation, some of us are going to be sticking around. And tomorrow we're going to have an informal lunch, and Toby's going to be there, so you can come and talk to him a little bit more if you like. We're going to meet up at the food court at the Rutgers Student Center on the College Ave campus tomorrow at noon. So if you'd like to come to that, you could come and talk to one of our representatives. We'll also have a meeting on Monday at 8 p.m. in the philosophy department in the seminar room. It's on College Avenue. The address is 3 Seminary Place. We're going to meet up and discuss some issues related to global poverty over some pizza. So it'll be pretty fun and a chance to meet some of the people who are interested in this cause. Also, we have a petition that we're looking for people to read and sign in favor of making government aid more effective. So I hope you'd consider taking a look at that. Our representatives are going to have those. There was a survey placed on each of your seats. We use the information on these surveys to make our events better and to fund more events like these in the future. So please place one of those in the bins on your way out. For a final thought, at events like this, we all too often fall into a certain kind of failure mode where we learn about some important social problem and we might feel bad about it because as individuals we haven't done that much to solve the problem, or are part of a society that chooses not to solve a problem when it could. But not much changes afterwards. I hope this event isn't like that. I hope some of you hear what we say and think a little bit about actually changing things, doing something a little bit different. So I'm going to offer a challenge, a modest challenge. I'm not going to ask you to become a member of Giving What We Can today. That'd be a big commitment to make in one night, having just heard about it. But I'm going to suggest a first step. The first step is until the end of the semester, just until May 16th, to pledge to give 1% of what you earn during that time to the most effective charity you can find. If you're interested in taking this pledge, we'll collect signatures for that as well. You can talk to one of our representatives. And if that's not for you, that's fine too, but consider it a friendly challenge, a way to take a first step if you're convinced, yeah, this is worth doing. So I hope you enjoyed the event and look forward to talking to you. Food. Oh yeah, we have food in the back. So, come and hang out and talk with us a little bit.